Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to AP US History, as we look today at how America stepped out upon the world stage in the late 19th century. In 1890, the frontier closed. America had fulfilled our manifest destiny. We had spread from sea to shining sea. But why stop there? After all, the late 1800s were an age of imperialism for the Europeans, and why should America not imitate the success of the British Empire, or the French, or even the Japanese? After all, the Japanese had transformed themselves from a medieval society into a highly industrialized one in less than 3 decades, and had beaten China severely in the Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895, establishing Japan as a growing world empire too. And as America spread out into the world, this was for the most part economic and missionary in nature, but it was also based on new ideas of national security. In 1890, a naval officer and historian, Alfred Thayer Mahan, published one of the most influential books of the era, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And he argued that all great modern nations had become great and maintained their greatness through sea power. Not only could a great navy promote and protect foreign trade and colonization, but could also be used to defend the home country from foreign attack. Indeed, through the power of a blockade, a great navy could even defeat another country economically without having to resort to a large-scale invasion. Both of these were particularly appealing ideas to America, who had no really threatening neighbors on land and a traditional aversion to standing armies or foreign adventures. Indeed, this seemed like a natural extension of the Monroe Doctrine. And so Mahan, and those who followed his ideas, concluded America needed a large, modern, steam-powered, steel-plated navy. Of course, a steam-powered navy had advantages over a sailing navy. A sailing ship can only go where the wind blows, and the wind is variable. It does not always blow the direction you want. Some places the wind fails entirely. Near the equator, near the tropic lines, the wind often fails. At very high latitudes, the wind is very dangerous. So, with steam power, the ship goes where you want it to, when you want it to. On the other hand, wind is free. With a steam-powered navy, you need coaling stations around the world, places you control, or places at least friendly enough you can rely upon them to supply your navy with coal anywhere you might need to sail around the world. Furthermore, America, with 2 coasts to protect, needed a way to easily travel from the East Coast to the West Coast. And while it was certainly possible to sail around the southern tip of South America, it's a long and dangerous voyage. And so increasingly, Americans believed we needed an Isthmian Canal, a route across Central America. A widely considered route was Nicaragua, connecting the Caribbean Sea to Lake Nicaragua and Lake Nicaragua to the Pacific Ocean. Although there was heavy volcanic activity in Nicaragua that frightened away some investors. There were some who wanted to build a canal in Panama, but that was then part of Colombia. A French company was working on a canal there, but it was going poorly. Now in 1850, the U.S. and Britain had signed the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, in which we both agreed that neither nation would fortify or hold exclusive control over any canal that might be built across Central America. Still, both countries wanted to build a canal, and in 1901 renegotiated our agreement in the Hay-Pauncefote Treaty, allowing the U.S. to build and control a canal across the Isthmus of Central America, although under the condition it remain a neutral waterway, open to all ships sailing from any nation. The freedom of the seas America has always respected. And the need for coaling stations, even in remote places, would nearly bring the United States, Britain, and Germany to war in 1889 over the islands of Samoa. In March of 1889, 3 American warships and 3 German warships faced off in Apia Harbor, while a British warship watched to see what might happen. And they came close to firing shots. The world was only saved from a war when a hurricane blew in, sank all 3 German ships and all 3 American ships. It badly damaged the British ship too, although it did survive and even rescue many of the sailors from the sunk German and American ships. In the end, in 1899, the U.S. and Germany agreed to split Samoa, and America still controls the eastern part of Samoa. Germany lost their part as punishment for World War I. Britain got no part of Samoa, but did sort out another border dispute in Africa to make things up between them and Germany. And in the late 1800s, America began building a large modern navy. By the time World War I broke out, the United States had the 3rd largest navy on Earth, just a tiny bit behind Germany's high seas fleet, but still less than half the size of Britain's Royal Navy, where by law the British Navy had to be more than the combined size of the 2nd and 3rd largest navies on Earth put together, a law known as the two-power rule. And Americans did continue looking for a route across Central America, and as American sea power grew, it was better and better able to protect and support American missionaries and businessmen overseas. Now, American missionaries began to go overseas in large numbers during the Second Great Awakening, including to the Kingdom of Hawaii, where American missionaries first arrived in 1820. Many of their descendants remained there as religious leaders or getting involved in business, sugar planting, pineapple planting, cattle ranching, and in part, of course, hoping to save the souls of Hawaiians or to make money, or both, and also because many found it much more pleasant to spend the winter in Honolulu than in Boston. Later, other Americans and Europeans moved there too to grow tropical crops. In 1887, some Americans and Europeans in Hawaii forced a new constitution upon King David Kalakaua, a constitution known as the Bayonet Constitution, because it was forced on the monarch. It stripped the monarch of most of his powers and strictly limited the rights of native Hawaiians, turning them in many ways into second-class citizens of their own country. When King David Kalakaua died with no children of his own, the throne passed to his sister, Queen Lili'uokalani, and she tried to regain political power for herself and equality for her people, but met with resistance from the planters. For one thing, the sugar and pineapple planters were now desperate. The McKinley Tariff of 1890 had set such a high tariff on imports to the United States that it was becoming almost impossible to ship Hawaiian products to the U.S. And so many felt the best thing to do was simply become part of the United States and hope to be annexed. And so in 1893, a so-called Committee of Safety, with some help from U.S. Marines stationed in Hawaii, overthrew Queen Lili'uokalani and set up a provisional government that sought annexation by the United States. And President Benjamin Harrison seemed to favor annexing Hawaii, but it doesn't really matter what he thinks. He has just lost his re-election campaign to Grover Cleveland. And President Cleveland and many Americans opposed annexing Hawaii, not wanting to spread our resources so thin, many feeling too that it really hadn't been appropriate to overthrow the Queen of Hawaii in that way. Indeed, President Cleveland himself wanted to send the Marines back to put the Queen back on her throne. This did not have enough support from Congress to happen, but Congress also did not annex Hawaii, as some Hawaiians had hoped. And so, with the old monarchy gone, but no annexation by the United States, Hawaii became a republic. under the leadership, at first, of President Sanford Dole, who's not the pineapple Dole, but is his cousin. A few years later, though, in 1898, under President McKinley, the United States did annex Hawaii and make it a U.S. territory. And tropical crops did not just topple the Kingdom of Hawaii. In the late 1800s, Americans had also begun to invest in banana plantations in Central and South America. In return for building railroads in those countries, American companies got preferential treatment in a number of places, particularly Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, and Colombia. In some cases, the various banana companies, such as those that merged to form United Fruit Company, now better known as Chiquita Banana, and Standard Fruit Company, now known as Dole Foods, as well as some other companies like the British company, Phipes, became so powerful that with all the land that they owned, the railroads they controlled, and the financial incentives they had for the government, they essentially controlled entire countries, which came to be described as banana republics. Perhaps the original banana republic was Honduras. In 1910, Cuyamel Fruit, one of the companies that later merged to form United Fruit in 1930, complained that its taxes were too high. When the president of Honduras refused to give the company any new tax breaks, Cuyamel Fruit hired some thugs in New Orleans, sent them down to Honduras to beat up the president and literally throw him out of office, through, I believe, the window. The next president gave Cuyamel Fruit not just a tax reduction, but a 25-year waiver from paying any taxes at all. And American fruit companies would destabilize governments in other Central American and South American countries over and over the next few decades. Americans were also very interested in China, thanks to the missionary work begun there during the Second Great Awakening. And in China, the Chinese were becoming less and less powerful in their own country. Since the First Opium War of 1839 to 1842, when the British forced China to permit the sale of British opium from India in China, and Britain gained control of Hong Kong, a series of military and diplomatic humiliations had resulted in China signing a series of what they called unequal treaties, which had carved China up into spheres of influence, technically all ruled by the Emperor of China, but each economically dominated by some European country, or eventually, in a few places, Japan. The United States was opposed to this. It seemed, of course, contrary to ideas of self-government, contrary to ideas of free trade, and worst of all, when these spheres of influence were considered, was the fact America had got in too late to get one of our own. And so in 1899, the U.S. Secretary of State, John Hay, demanded an open door in China, saying that any country should be allowed to trade in any part of China without preferential treatment or preferential customs duties. The open door, too, would protect China's territorial integrity, so that European powers and Japan could not dismember China outright. Europeans and Japan agreed to this in principle, but often ignored or at least bent the rules set forth by the United States when they felt they could get away with it. Although, even if America had not gotten a sphere of influence of our own, we did have some influence in China, enough to partly insist on this open door, because we had become more involved in the response to the actions of the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists. This was a group of Chinese who understandably resented the foreign domination of their ancient country. The Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists wanted a revival of Chinese culture. They celebrated traditional Chinese religious beliefs and traditional Chinese martial arts. Indeed, while they called themselves a society of righteous and harmonious fists, um, the only martial art most Americans knew of involving fists was boxing. And so, this society were often referred to as the Boxers, particularly in the newspapers and magazines of the United States. And in the late 1890s, the Boxers began to attack foreign businessmen, foreign diplomats, foreign missionaries, all of whom they saw as undermining Chinese culture and power. They also attacked Chinese who worked with foreigners, and particularly attacked Chinese Christians, who they felt had betrayed their culture by converting their religion. So Chinese Christians were massacred by the thousands, the hundreds of thousands, in some cases roasted alive and eaten. And this uprising was known as the Boxer Rebellion. It began in southern China in 1899, but really only became a serious issue for outsiders in 1900, when it spread to northern China and the Dowager Empress of China, who in large part governed China on behalf of her son, the emperor, began to support the Boxer Rebellion, hoping it would be a way to drive out foreign influence from China. In June of 1900, the Boxers invaded the foreign diplomatic area of Peking, as China's capital was then known, where they murdered the German ambassador, who to be sure was quite a jerk, but that's not really the right way to treat a foreign diplomat. Diplomats fortified their section of the city and it was besieged. Now, the Boxers were confident of their success even before the Chinese army began to support them, because their leaders had told them if they were pure of heart, foreign devils' bullets could not hurt them. And their leaders had proven this by taking foreign guns and shooting at them, doing them no harm, although not telling them that they were actually shooting blanks. In response to the threat to their diplomats, eventually 6 European countries and Japan and the United States sent 50,000 troops to China to suppress the rebellion. As a member of this 8-nation alliance, the United States sent 3,125 soldiers and 295 Marines to China. This put us kind of in the mid-range of the 8 nations involved. Far fewer men than were sent by, say, Britain or Russia, but more than were sent by, say, Italy or Austria. Although, probably the best-known veteran of the Boxer Rebellion today was a young Austrian naval officer, Baron von Trapp, although he's remembered today less for his military exploits than for his role in The Sound of Music. And while the U.S. did not send as many troops as some countries, the Marines played a very important role in scaling the walls of Peking and relieving the siege of the diplomatic quarter. After 55 days, the diplomats were rescued. The rebellion was not fully suppressed, though, until September of 1901, and China was even further reduced under foreign influence. But America was able to respond so effectively to the Boxer Rebellion, was willing to annex Hawaii, because in 1898, the United States was also going to war with the oldest empire in the Western Hemisphere, the remnants of the Empire of Spain.